Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today, I'm going to be discussing this book, Dinotopia, by James Gurney. This one I bought for $15 at Page One Books here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's got a bit of water damage or something. I don't know if it's easy to see, but maybe like over here, it's just the jacket has a bit of wear and tear on it. Now, this is the original story, the story that kind of opened up and introduced people to Dinotopia. It's copyright 1992, first HarperCollins edition 1998. There's a neat little bookmark in here that came with the book when I saw it on the shelves. You know, I always like finding things like that. One of the things I really love about this book in general is just amazing. And the other book, I don't remember showing it, but this is a map of Dinotopia. I said this in the Journey to Shandara video, which is right there, that book. And I think I said it again in the rant about the book My Beloved Brontosaurus. Dinosaur books are just inherently cool. And I will say dinosaurs are fun at basically any age. What I especially like about this book, and this one is a bit more dense with information than the other Dinotopia book I discussed. This one is I was discussing it with a friend a few weeks ago, but this feels like a campaign setting guide we play a lot of tabletop role-playing games, me and this friend. We've been playing games together since 2011, I want to say, and we've known each other since 2009. So, very close friend of mine. We talk a lot about GMing and how we can improve game design or gameplay design. One thing that both he and I like is how this really describes and details Dinotopia in a way that feels alive. Like you can insert a character into this setting, and it doesn't really have much in the way of conflict, except in the sense of like an isekai adjusting to a new world kind of conflict. But this is a interesting story of two people, a father and a son, who are brought to Dinotopia by dolphins. That is basically how every human gets to Dinotopia. If they are not born on Dinotopia, they are dolphin backs, is what they're called. This book just has some really cool, like, setting details. This is a good page for it. But on one page, there's, like, toys that kids would play with. Horses, I don't know if horses are a thing on Dinotopia, but instead of like a rocking horse, they have a rocking triceratops. Instead of like a little wagon wagon kind of thing, it's this little like tricycle. But then they also have like this page, which the caption says, "Overworked human parents are fortunate to have the help of dinosaur nannies." And in this case, it's, a dinosaur, a bipedal dinosaur with two infants in a little carrier on its back, which is just adorable. And these aren't kinds of things that you see in a standard campaign setting for D&D, but for a more specialized and less combat focused tabletop role-playing game, this would be a great setting guide. Another kind of interesting facet of this story, it's set in approximately 1860. They say that time doesn't really, they Dinotopians think of time in a less linear way than humans do. Even so, no one at the time of the main characters, Arthur and William Dennison, by the time they get to Dinotopia, They are the youngest generation of people, 1860s. No one there seems to have been brought by dolphin after 1860, and a lot of people were brought before 1860. And they have this moment where the main character is speaking about a host, Alec Orchardwine, who spoke an archaic form of English. He seemed to search the air above his head for words, then said to Will something that sounded like, "Welcome, wee laddie." He then pointed to a painting of a dolphin as if he knew the means of our rescue. He referred to himself as 15 Mothers English, by which I was to understand that his ancestors had landed here 15 generations ago, or some 400 years. There may have been some error of language here. Later, when they get to a more like forge and smithing kind of community, which seems to be a bit isolated because of the use of fire and metals and extraction from the main cities. There's a character, Tok Timbu. Tok is a remarkable man, strong and a very talented artisan, with great personal dignity. He is foremothers African, descended from a Yoruba king. What I found fascinating about that is, again, no one seems to have come to Dinotopia any newer than 1860. So these two main characters, the generations, assuming it's a 20-year generation, which 400 divided by 15, it's about 26 years per generation. If we're treating that as mostly true, foremothers Yoruba would mean that at some point in time, Tok Timbu had been his ancestors were shipwrecked, because that is how all Dinotopians that arrive on Dolphin back get to Dinotopia, is on the back of a dolphin because of a shipwreck. So they shipwrecked approximately 100 years before 1860, which would be 1760-ish. Now, given that he's descendant of a Yoruba community, a Yoruba king, that doesn't guarantee that his ancestors were slaves, but it does make it fairly likely. And so that's one of those things where I don't think it was necessarily intentional by James Gurney, but the main characters are from the 1860s. They are interacting with someone who would have been impacted, almost certainly his family would have been impacted by the slave trade. And something that uh, you would think it gets brought up again, and this may be an artifact of maybe the book was being developed as it was being written, but there's a later part it's identifying a couple plants. It says, this is a rare species known only to Dinotopia, related to the common burdock genus of the Old and New Worlds. Deep-rooted and growing to a height of 3 to 6 feet, it bears purple flowers with hooked bristles. Tinctures of the flowers are used in medicinal healing, especially to promote strong wing membranes among the pterosaurs. The root is gathered, dried, and prepared in a tea-like infusion using waters of the springs near Bent Root, and offered to humans after they have reached 24 summers. The claim often made is that the tea changes the body's chemistry to reverse the aging process. Thus, a human can approach or even exceed the long lifespans of the dinosaurs, known to live beyond their 250th year. And he says he met a guy who claimed to be Cornelius Huygen, born in Holland in the year 1618, who worked with the Dutch East India Company. And he, the narrator is a bit skeptical, but is willing to kind of buy into it. And then later in the story, when the narrator's son and a female kind of love interest, kind of platonic interest, she is from the first family to have hosted the two of them as they were washed up onto Dinotopia. And then they get close and eventually do the same job and spend a lot of time together and that sort of thing. This is the part that is a bit intriguing. But again, Dinotopia, people get there from shipwreck, but there are also communities in the mountains of Dinotopia that house Tibetan monks, one of whom appears to be centuries old. There's a interesting implication that there are some more ancient, like ancient Egyptians, were in Dinotopia and carved architecture out of rock and sandstone that is akin to ancient like Sphinx architecture and that sort of thing. There's also, let me see if I can find the page. Here it is. A comparison between like human vision on this page and dinosaur vision on this page, and the differences in how they perceive the world and seem to perceive forms of like animal life more than anything else. There's this artwork which is very Naboo like. It definitely does look like it could have been. I remember reading that somewhere. I don't know the veracity of that claim. I'm trying to find it in here. There was a page where like they choose their jobs, choose their intended path in life by meeting up with some Dinotopian like career masters, something to that effect. Here. This spread page art. And what it says is the different biological regions to which humans are kind of aligned. There are habitat partners. And they have the aerial, which is a man named Ulu, and Lightwing, pterosaur. Forest, which is Bracken and Fiddlehead, a Chasmosaurus. Alpine, which is moraine, and Big Tusk, which is a woolly mammoth. And there are some like prehistoric megafaunal mammals on Dinotopia as well. There is the desert with Dorsalith, a Eulocephalus, and Seco, Five Mothers Sonoran, and that being like Sonoran Desert. And that, you know, it does kind of stretch the imagination because it implies that everyone that got here was by dolphin. But how were dolphins in the Sonoran? Maybe someone was canoeing in the Gulf of Mexico and ended up in Dinotopia. It implies that spatial logic doesn't really work. There's the freshwater with Paddlefoot, a Lambeosaurus, and Magnolia, and then Draco and High Jump, who represent the savannah. High Jump is a Struthiomimus, and then beaches and bays, it says, these are the charge of the dolphins who obviously could not be present because they were in the middle of a rainforest temple. I was deeply impressed by the care and concern each sector displayed for the whole, and glad I'd had time to study Dinotopia's flora and fauna at Waterfall City. Will is in awe that he has actually been introduced to Ulu, the head Skyback's trainer from Canyon City. And so it's just a really interesting book. All these different facets to the setting and how a character might interact with different habitats, different people groups. It's just a really interesting book. And that's one of the things I really love about it is I remember reading this as a kid, but as an adult, I have a new appreciation for it. Not just because I have experience with tabletop role-playing games and am relating one to the other, but also because just the book is interesting. It is a well-made setting. And I think of subreddits like world building, and of course Tolkien's world building is looked at with a measure of awe and respect, but also a measure of this doesn't need to be done this way. George R.R. Martin's setting design is awed by some people and disdained by others. I've never seen James Gurney mentioned when discussing anything on that subreddit, but he really should be, because this world that he designed is well made, and he thinks about all these details that other setting builders don't necessarily think of. Toys that kids play with, songs. And I forgot to mention, there's in I think I mentioned it in Journey to Shandara, but that there were a few songs written in the back of the book, and there's a song written in this one, and it's actually the page that was bookmarked. It says, "A Song of Dinotopia," uh, and it's in the 4/4 time signature. Um, let's see if you can read that. It says, "Come forth in joy to greet the morn, ye shipwrecked travelers on our shores reborn. Look up to see the rosy banners rise, the dawn's new promise writ across the skies. Breathe deep, seek peace." And then that's verse 1, and then it says, you repeat, of course, "Join all in one the great parade, in bright-hued feathers or in scales arrayed. Life's spirit garbed in various attire, our island's wardrobe does its soul inspire." And then again, "Breathe deep, seek peace," which is a recurring theme. They say that a lot in these. It's a lot of like wisdom. Calm down, breathe deep, and then seek peace rather than conflict. And then it says for the third verse, "Come round the fountain, crystal spring, let ancient wisdom from its sources bring, a drink to cool the warring and the strife, the quiet waters of enduring life." And then it has a fourth verse at the very bottom as well. It says, "Take up the chisel and the drum, each adding flourishes with claw or thumb, so glorious cities rise from stony ground, advancing skyward with triumphal sound." It's just, there is so much beautiful art, there's so much beautiful character design, world design. This one is probably the last art piece I'm going to show you, but this is also the art that's on the jacket. So the jacket art is taken from the art in the book itself, and there's this just fascinating work written and illustrated by James Gurney. And like I said, with A Journey to Shandara, he kept working on it. He wanted to expand upon the world to show what another civilization might look like and how it might interact with the dinosaurs in that region, which seemed to be more avian dinosaurs with coats of feathers. And how would the culture of humans respecting dinosaurs differ, and how the humans would wear clothing that emulates feathers, and that dinosaurs with feathers would, even if they couldn't use them to fly, would use them for communication, and these humans would emulate that. It is a fascinating series, and I love this book. I love the other one. The novels were a bit more of a collection of other authors writing in that setting. I'm not as big a fan of the other novels, the short stories, as I am the original works created by James Gurney, and I am so happy that I have one copy of these that is signed and has that little T-Rex illustration in it. This copy is not signed. I only paid $15 for it, and I am happy with what I have. I would pay full price for this. I am happy that I found them used, but I would pay full price for this. And I think if you have any appreciation for dinosaurs, or any of the context that I've been talking about in this book, maybe you like dinosaurs, maybe you like campaign kind of guides, maybe you want inspiration for a prehistoric tabletop role-playing game setting that you're using, maybe you just want to see how a quasi isekai story would play out. It's got a lot of different reasons why you might be interested in this book, and I cannot emphasize enough how much I love this series. So yeah, this is a longer video, but I highly recommend this book. So yeah, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.